You think being alone makes you weak? No. Being alone for too long makes you dangerous. Most men don't see it happening. At first it feels like freedom. No one calling, no one waiting up, no one asking where you've been. But isolation isn't just silence. It's transformation. It's the slow death of the man you were, and the slow birth of something harder, sharper, and far less forgiving. You stop needing validation. You stop chasing. You stop explaining yourself to anyone. And while the world keeps telling you that a man must settle down to be complete, you begin to see the game for what it is, a leash disguised as love. This isn't about hating women. It's about seeing how much of your life was shaped by the need for approval, attention, and intimacy. And what happens when you rip that need out of your chest and burn it? You start eating alone, training alone, sleeping without the warmth of another body beside you. The first weeks, your mind screams for the comfort of touch. The first months, you feel the absence like a phantom limb. But then, something changes. You stop craving it. Your mind adapts to the quiet. You hear your own thoughts with brutal clarity. You begin to notice how much of the world runs on seduction, advertisements, entertainment, even the smiles of strangers, and you see it all without the haze of desire blinding you. You're no longer a moth flying into every flame. You become the man who stands in the dark, watching the fire from a distance, knowing it burns everything it touches. But here's the thing no one tells you. The longer you stay in this state, the harder it is to come back. Not because you can't, but because you won't want to. You've built a fortress around yourself, and inside it, you are untouchable, but also unreachable. Most men fear loneliness. The few who master it become something the world can't control. At first, solitude feels like a punishment. You sit in the quiet, and every thought you've avoided for years comes crawling back. Regrets, old heartbreaks, embarrassing mistakes you hoped were buried. In the noise of everyday life, these things hide, but when you're alone for too long, they have nowhere to go, and they demand to be faced. This is where most men break. They run back to distraction, meaningless dates, constant texting, endless scrolling, anything to avoid that mirror in their mind. But if you endure, something powerful begins to happen. Your brain starts to rewire itself. You no longer need constant stimulation. The dopamine drip of someone's attention stops being your drug. You start doing things for the sake of doing them, not for the applause or approval they bring. You read because you want to know. You train because you want to be strong. You work because you take pride in building. And something even stranger happens. Your tolerance for nonsense disappears. You stop engaging in arguments that lead nowhere. You stop explaining your worth. You stop trying to convince people to see you a certain way. The approval you once begged for now feels irrelevant. This is when other people start to notice. They can't put their finger on it, but they feel it. You've stopped orbiting around them. You've built your own gravity, and it pulls them toward you. Your words carry weight because you don't need to speak them to be validated. Your silence becomes a challenge they can't ignore. And here's the paradox. The less you chase connection, the more valuable your presence becomes. You're no longer a man trying to fit into someone else's life. You're a man who could walk away at any moment, and that possibility terrifies people, especially women. But there's a hidden danger here. The more self-reliant you become, the more alien you feel in the company of others. Conversations feel shallow, relationships feel like compromises. And every time you try to step back into the world, you realize how much you've outgrown it. This is the point where solitude is no longer a phase. it becomes an identity. When a man has lived alone for too long, something shifts in his energy, and women can feel it instantly. It's not about being cold, it's about being untouchable. The subtle cues that used to give away your hunger for intimacy are gone. You're not scanning the room for approval, you're not leaning in too fast, you're not radiating that silent desperation most men carry without even realizing it. To a woman, this is unsettling. She's used to being the center of a man's attention. She's used to her looks, her smile, her body, being the lever that moves him. But with you, the lever is broken. You look at her the way you'd look at a painting in a museum. You can appreciate the beauty, but you feel no compulsion to own it. That indifference, it's magnetic. It makes her question herself. It makes her work harder for your attention. She starts to notice that she's investing in you without you lifting a finger. That's the silent dominance of a man who doesn't need her. And deep down, every woman respects it, even if she resents it. But here's the part men don't usually talk about. Your disinterest isn't an act. You've gone without intimacy long enough that you've broken the chemical addiction to female validation. You no longer confuse lust for love. You no longer accept attention as proof of value. And that makes you immune to the manipulations that catch weaker men. You see the games, the subtle tests, the power plays, the bait, and instead of reacting, you simply don't bite. You're not hostile, you're not rude. You're just a man whose inner peace is worth more than a fleeting thrill. Over time, women will either try harder to break through your walls, or they'll avoid you entirely because they know they can't control you. Both reactions are proof that you've stepped into a rare category, the man who cannot be swayed by beauty alone. But this power comes with a price. The longer you remain in this state, the more difficult it becomes to genuinely connect. You start to question if you even want to. And that's when solitude stops being a shield and starts becoming a prison. There's a fine line between self-mastery and self-exile, and most men who live alone for too long cross it without realizing. At first, solitude feels like discipline. You control your environment, you choose your routines, you move through life without compromise. But slowly, that control turns into something else: withdrawal. You stop letting people in, not because they're unworthy, but because it's easier. You stop sharing your thoughts, not because you have nothing to say, but because you no longer care to explain yourself. The world starts to feel distant, almost unreal, and you begin to see other people as distractions rather than connections. This is where danger creeps in. When you spend too much time alone, your mind adapts to a life without emotional risk. No arguments, no vulnerability, no chance of being hurt. And while that sounds like freedom, it's also the slow erosion of your ability to feel. You stop getting nervous before important moments. You stop getting excited about small victories. Even the highs lose their power because the lows have been erased. You become numb, not in a dramatic, broken-hearted way, but in a quiet, almost peaceful way. And that's the problem. Numbness feels safe, but it kills growth. Without discomfort, without challenge, you start to stagnate. You stop sharpening yourself against the unpredictability of other human beings. Worse still, you lose your ability to read people. The subtle cues of conversation, the tiny shifts in body language, the unspoken emotional signals, all of that fades when you stop engaging. You might think, your isolation makes you wiser, but in truth it makes you blind to the constant social dance happening around you. And here's the cruel twist. The more you pull away, the less you feel you belong anywhere. Crowds make you restless. Intimacy makes you anxious. Invitations feel like obligations. You tell yourself you're above it all, but deep down, you know you've built a cage. and thrown away the key. Stoicism teaches us to be self-reliant, but self-reliance without connection isn't strength, it's exile dressed as discipline. And if you're not careful, the fortress you built to protect yourself becomes the place you slowly disappear in. A man who has lived alone for too long stands at a crossroads. One path leads deeper into isolation, where numbness becomes the norm and human connection feels like a foreign language. The other path, it turns solitude into fuel, not a cage, but a forge. The difference lies in what you do with your aloneness. The Stoics understood this. Marcus Aurelius, Epictetus, Seneca, they all spent long stretches in isolation. But they didn't waste it. They used solitude as a time to sharpen the mind, to train the body, to fortify the spirit. They didn't retreat from life forever. They prepared for it. If you're living alone, you have an advantage most men never get. Uninterrupted focus. No one pulling you off course. No one draining your energy. No one distracting you from your own mission. This is the perfect time to build yourself into something formidable, physically, mentally, financially. But you must set rules for yourself. Without structure, solitude will dissolve into laziness and mental decay. Wake up early, train like a soldier, read until your mind burns with new ideas, build a skill that makes you valuable in any room, and most importantly, test yourself regularly against the world outside your walls. Because here's the truth. Power unused is power lost. If you never step into situations where your discipline, charm, and composure are challenged, they'll atrophy. Just like muscles, they grow only when tested. Solitude should prepare you for battle, not replace it. When you re-enter the world after building yourself in silence, you move differently. You don't crave attention, but you command it. You don't beg for respect, you radiate it. People can feel that you've been somewhere most men fear to go, and returned stronger. And that's the secret. You don't escape solitude by running from it. You escape by mastering it, using it to carve away weakness until what's left is unshakable. Then, and only then, do you step back into the fire of human connection. Not as a man who needs it to survive, but as a man who chooses it because he's already whole. One day, you will look in the mirror and barely recognize yourself. Not because you've grown older, but because solitude has carved you into something leaner, sharper, harder. The boy who once needed constant approval will be gone. The man staring back will be forged in silence. But here's the question you must answer. Will that man be a weapon or a relic? If you let solitude consume you entirely, you'll fade into the background of life. The world will move on without you. Opportunities will pass you by because no one will know you're there. You'll become a ghost in your own lifetime, untouchable, yes, but unseen. If you master it, however, you become dangerous in the way great men are dangerous. Not because you're loud, but because you're disciplined. Not because you chase, but because you choose. Your presence will carry the weight of someone who doesn't need to be there. And that's exactly why people will want you there. Remember this. Solitude is like fire. Too little, and you're cold and weak. Too much, and it burns you down to ashes. The Stoic way is balance. Withdraw to build, return to test yourself. Retreat to sharpen, engage to prove your edge. Most men will never understand what it's like to be truly alone. They fear it. They fill every quiet moment with noise, every empty space with someone else's company. But you will have gone where they couldn't. You will have faced the mirror without flinching. You will have built a man who can stand without leaning on anyone else. And when you step back into the world, people will sense it. They'll see it in your posture, hear it in your voice, feel it in the way you hold eye contact without blinking. Women will feel the pull of a man who doesn't orbit anyone, and men will either respect you or envy you. So live alone if you must, but don't waste it. Use it. And when the time comes to open the door and walk back into the noise, do it not as the man who left, but as the man who returns, forged, focused, and utterly unshakable. Because in the end, the world fears the man who could walk away from everything and still remain whole.